Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our sixth and final discussion hosted by the Consorzio Franciacorta this month of June as part of our digital festival. My name is May Matta-Aliah, the ambassador for Franciacorta in New York. I will be moderating this, which is our final discussion today. Over the last few weeks, we've discussed a variety of topics about the region of Franciacorta. We started with a discussion of the history. We talked about biodiversity initiatives in the region. We then discussed Satin, Dosage Zero, and Rosé, all categories that I'm very excited about in the region. And today, we're closing out our discussion with the rarest and finest of Franciacorta, which is Reserva Franciacorta. Reserva wines are only produced in exceptional years and must undergo an extended period of maturation in the cellars before they are released to the market. But to help us better understand how to produce and what really distinguishes a Reserva Franciacorta, and to discuss the rarity of these wines, we are joined by three producers today. I'm delighted to introduce them, starting with Maurizio Zanela from Ca del Bosco Winery. Maurizio is the founder and president of Ca del Bosco Winery, one of the most recognized names in Franciacorta. His love for wine and the region were ignited when he was 15 years old, but that love affair has only flamed higher after a visit to the Champagne region. Today, Ca del Bosco Winery has been considered one of the most trailblazing in Italy, defined by a relentless quest for excellence. Next, we have Lucia Barzano from Il Musnil Winery. Lucia represents the fifth generation of her family that has been making wine in the region since 1836. Lucia's mother, Emanuela, was one of the first producers in the region to adopt the newly introduced Franciacorta DOC back in 1968. Working alongside her brother, Giulio, Lucia oversees the marketing, communication, and administration of the Musnil Winery. And last but not least, we are joined by Francesca Paladin from Castello Bonomi. Francesca is a member of the family that owns Castello Bonomi. She's the export manager for the winery. The property is located at the foothills of Monte Orfano, which represents the southern border of the Franciacorta zone. Castello Bonomi gets its name from the original Art Nouveau estate, and it's the only chateau in the Franciacorta region. So thank you, all of you, for joining me today and for joining our guests for this, our last discussion. And I would like to kick it off with my first question to you, Francesca. I always say I'm a teacher at heart. So the first point of discussion, I always like to clarify what we're discussing. So today we're talking about Reserva. So let's help our guests understand, what is Reserva? Could you describe the term Reserva and what it means in Franciacorta? And also, must it always be a millesimato or a single vintage wine?
Yeah, thank you, May. So the Reserva Franciacorta, as you were saying before, it's the highest category and highest quality of Franciacorta that you can find. And it's a Franciacorta which is made just in really exceptional vintages. It's a millesimato, so it's a single vintage Franciacorta. And we produce it just in the best vintages. So for this reason, the quality of the grapes are really high, and we want to highlight and exalt them with a longer period of aging in contact with the lease.
Wonderful. So what could you tell us actually, what is the minimum aging requirement for maturation on the lease, both for the millesimato and then for millesimato Reserva?
Yeah, so for the millesimato, it's 30 months. While for the Reserva, it's 60 months, which is really a long period, and it's also the minimum requirement. So from then on, wine can age also 10 or 20 months or 20 years also on the lease.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's always interesting because we talk about those numbers, but it's always interesting to highlight that those really are minimums.
Yeah.
That you can exceed, you can go as long as you want, as it's your choice as a winery. Great, thank you. All right, so my next question is for you, Lucia. So we've talked about the wine spends time aging on the lease for 5 years potentially for the Reserva millesimato. What changes does that wine undergo while it's aging on the lees in the bottle?
So we can say that there are a lot of changes, because starting from the view, of the wine, if you look at the glass, you see very gold yellow, a very brilliant but gold yellow. And then if you smell the aroma of the wine, you can find more, we can say, a bouquet, a very complex bouquet, and with more tertiary kind of aromas, and like very ripe fruit and very, we can say, all the kind of tertiary aromas. And then if you consider the taste of the wine, you find also first the bubbles. The bubbles are very fine, very tiny, because during the long aging, the wine and the carbonic mixed very well, and the bubbles became the same as the wine. So it's a very fine and subtle texture on the tongue. And then if you taste the wine, you can find these kind of complex aromas and like very ripe fruit, and all the aromas and the taste of the long and very, very long maturation of the wine.
Great, thank you. So yeah, the change is visual, aroma, and also in the texture of the wine, right? So you're saying the bubbles really become much more delicate and refined during that extra aging. Great, thank you. So those are sort of the changes we're talking about while the wine is aging with the lees in the bottle. But my next question is to you, Maurizio, because once those wines are disgorged, what is the potential for maturation? How does the wine continue to mature and improve after disgorgement?
Well, we're talking of the highest category of Franciacorta that are on the market. So we assume that all the producers, they try to do the best in order to get the best grapes, the best process. And so for sure, even after degorgement, there will be a evolution, a maturation of the wine, and that will be positive, will be not something negative. And obviously we need to have the bottle always horizontal. We need to have a good cork. We have to have a good temperature. And with these three elements, I am sure that the wine, they will evolve and get a profile that will be mature in a positive way and give to the wine all what it can give to you, even after 10 years after the degradation.
Great, thank you. So absolutely have aging potential. So my next question goes back to you, Lucia. In terms of categories, we have talked about Satin, we've talked about Rosé, we've talked about Dosage Zero and other discussions. Can all Franciacorta categories be produced as a Reserva?
Yes, you can have a Reserva Brut or Padosé, or a Rosé or a Satin as well. They have to come from a single vintage, and they have to age for the minimum of 60 months, but they can be all Reserva, yes.
Okay, great. So in terms of a decision for your winery, we're saying it has to be, ideal conditions to make a Reserva. How do you decide at Ilmosnell which wine will become a Reserva? What are you looking for in the vintage or in the wine? What are the characteristics you're looking for?
So we consider first the season. How was the season, and how is the grape? And if we consider that the grape has the right characteristic to be a Reserva, we search for a good balance between acidity and sugar towards the acidity, because we have a wine which has to to age for a long period, so we need a little bit more acidity. And then if we decide to make Reserva in that particular year, we don't have, in our winery, we don't have a special cuvée or a special blend, but we decide depending on the year and depending on or how the grapes are. And so then we usually make the fermentation and aging in oak barrels and then in the bottle for minimum 5 years.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'd like to pose that same question to you, Francesca. At Castello Bonomi, what are you looking for your Reserva? How do you decide if it's going to be a Reserva year?
Yeah, we decided in 3 different moments. So the first moment would be when we look at the grapes, that they have the right balance between the acidity and all the quality levels of the grapes. Then in a second moment, so when we do the cuvée, we usually use 3 parcels to produce this Reserva. And then when we do the cuvée, we decide also if the wine has the right quality to become a Reserva. And then also during the aging process, we taste it in different moments. For example, after 30 months and then after 60 months and so on, to see also how the wine is evolving and how it shows in time. And usually we go out with a Reserva that have aged in about 10 years.
Okay, wow, that's impressive. Okay, and what about Ca del Bosco, Maurizio? What are you looking for in your Reserva?
Well,
and the wine for the Reserva.
Let's say that we are after 40 years producing this wine. First of all, it's not produced every year because we are looking, the vineyard now, we have different vineyard that each one give his help in order to build the cuvée. And so if those vineyards are not all in the best condition, we are not in the position to produce the wine. Let's say an average is 8 times on 10 that we produce. So it's quite a lot. It's not, is a good time. We will like to produce every year, but it's not possible always. And what we're looking is for the perfect ripeness of the grapes, because to make a great wine like this, you need to have a ripeness of the grapes, but to keeping all the elements that you need to make a wine that's supposed to ferment twice, because to become alcohol, the second to do the bubble inside the bottle. So you have to have those elements is mandatory, and have obviously a year that is not too rainy in order that can give you problem with botrytis and purity. And so this is essential.
Okay, great. So yeah, you're saying a Reserva you would make about 8 out of every 10 years is about what you
more or less, we can say in 40 years, this was the average.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's interesting because also all of you were discussing not just the ripeness, but also the acidity. And I think that's an important marker, especially when we're talking about wines for long-term maturation and improvement. And I always like to say that when we talk about long ageability, we are talking about wines that are improving and benefiting from that aging. That acidity is an important component. So yes, you need the ripeness, but you also need the acidity. And as you're saying, Maurizio, you also need good, healthy conditions in the vineyard. And all of those needs to occur at the same time to be able to have that right, that harvest. Great. So let's talk a little bit, I think you mentioned it a little bit, but let's talk a little bit more about the use of oak, because I know that, again, sometimes that's a decision. Different wineries have different philosophies. So I'm going to start with my question to you, actually, Francesca. Is fermentation or maturation in oak barrels more or less common for Reserva wines? And I'm going to just ask my next question also, what kind of oak are you typically using? Is it all French? Maybe if it is French, maybe the forest. Is anybody using American, Slavonian, Hungarian? I know now we have a lot of different oaks out there. So can you tell us a little bit about what's more typical? And then we'll ask specifically what you're doing at your winery.
Yeah, well, I mean, all the different wineries have their own philosophy on this, but generally, yeah, you use oak for the fermentation or for the maturation or both in Franciacorta Riserva. Well, we use it for the fermentation, and also in general, the oak helps the wine to gain more complexity. And it helps also to have a good maturation in time, and to give also some chance which are more rich and more complex. And usually the kind of oak that it's more used in Franciacorta, it's the French oak. Then it depends, maybe someone use just a new oak, someone else maybe third or fourth passage oak. It depends on the level of wood that you also want to have in the wine.
Okay. So you're fermenting an oak at your winery. You're fermenting.
Yeah. We're fermenting an oak, and we do also frequent bâtonnage because also the contact with the lees helps really the wine to get more rich, and it develops all the characteristics of sapidity and minerality, which are really important for long aging and for Franciacorta Riserva. Yeah.
Great. And Lucia, what about at your winery for the Reserva? Are you doing oak maturation, oak fermentation? Any particular kind of oak that you prefer to use?
Yes, we make the fermentation, maturation in oak barrels, and they come from French oak. And we are fully convinced about the use or the maturation in oak barrels for all our Franciacorta, and for Reserva, it's important for us.
So all the wines are fermented in oak.
Yes, with different percentage. Not Reserva is 100%, and other categories different percentage, but we use it, yes, for all our Franciacorta.
Great. Okay, and Maurizio, Cadel-Bosco?
The Reserva wine is the fermentation is done inside used barrel, second year used barrel, and also the maturation is from 9 months to 1 year in the same barrel. That is only for Reserva. For all the other wine, we don't do fermentation, or we do maturation in oak of 3rd, 4th, and 5th passage, because we have a reserve wine that we keep until 5 years in the barrel, but this is not for the Reserva. So for the Reserva is only fermented and mature in 2nd year oak.
Okay, great. So again, slightly different philosophies, but everybody's pretty much using oak for the Reserva. Wonderful, thank you. And last but not least, let's talk about food because it is noontime here. So let's inspire our guests. Favorite food pairings for Franciacorta Riserva and or Franciacorta Riserva, whatever you'd like to tell us about. Francesca, what do you love to have with your Franciacorta Riserva? Or rosé, or both, if you have 2 ideas.
Well, for Franciacorta Riserva, I would choose maybe a gazpacho, or maybe also some raw scampi, just really simple. And then just to enjoy with the people you love, because it's an exceptional Franciacorta, and so it's really nice to share it with people you love, and because it's a really precious Franciacorta.
Wonderful. And Lucia, what's your favorite pairing?
Oh, I love it with a good dish of spaghetti or linguine with lobster. which are very, very good. And with the Reserva, it's a very good pairing. And for me too, it's an important and a special Franciacorta. So it's important to drink it with the people you love.
Great. And Maurizio?
Well, I am associated with the Lucia. It's more important drinking with the people who are friendly and that you are happy with. But I have no, I just say no dessert, please. No cake, no sweet. For the rest, everything is great to have a Franciacorta, from the popcorn to the lobster. It's no matter what. The only important thing is the glass. Please avoid to use the flute. This is more important than the food. Don't use the
glass.
Quite good, but if it's larger, it's better. Because the wine needs to breathe after 10, 11, 12 years, and they need to breathe. So please don't use the flute when you drink. Generally, Franciacorta, but especially for Reserva, have a nice big glass.
You know, I had one quick question actually. Are you putting date of disgorgement on your bottles?
Personally, we put season, not date. We put season and year.
Okay.
So winter 18 or whatever.
Okay. And what about Francesca? Do you put a date of disgorgement on your?
Yeah.
You do. Okay. And Lucia?
Yes, we do with the month and the year of the disgorgement.
I think that's an important addition, actually, to mention. I meant to ask that earlier. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, I learned a lot, and I know that I'm very thirsty now, which is why I have my glass right next to me. But we have Constance is going to be joining us, and here she is through the magic of Zoom. And we have some questions, I think, coming in from our guests. So Constance, do you want to, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yes, we have a few. So the first is for Maurizio. 5 years, 60 months of maturation is impressive. Do any other sparkling wine regions have that minimum for their top wines by law?
By law, I believe not. For my concern, I believe that Franciacorta rules are the strongest in the world. There is no other appellation that demands such a long time in order to a minimum. You have to think, Constance, that I believe no one in Franciacorta does 60 months. I believe most of the winery, they go to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So, but the rules in Franciacorta, they was very important to build the cooperation from a number of vineyards that they go in the same direction. You cannot do quality by rules, but the rules helps the community to go in one direction.
Makes sense. Francesca, approximately how many years in a decade can you produce a Reserva Franciacorta?
Well, it really depends on the winery, but in Castello Bonomi, we produce about 4 years every decade. It depends on the vintage. We don't produce it every vintage, but just in the best ones. And usually we use just 3 crews that are that the grapes are harvested for the Franciacorta Riserva.
Okay, great. We did just have one question come through. I'm not sure, maybe Maurizio, you can answer this. What is the % of Franciacorta that is Reserva and available in the USA?
This is a very difficult question. I can answer for Cadel-Bosco, but I don't know in all the appellation. But let me say that will be more or less than 5%. The percentage of Reserva that is traveled, that is produced in the world, so not only in the United States. The percentage that we produce, like Franciacorta in Reserva, I believe is not 5%. So I assume that the United States will have this amount.
Okay, great. Lucia, how do you think climate change will affect the production of Malissimo and Reserva wines in Franciacorta?
Yes, I think that the climate change is a very difficult challenge for all the wine producers, but in Franciacorta we had a long work. We have done a long work experimenting with an old kind of grape, which is called Erba Mat, and it has a specific characteristic, and it is a very late ripening grape, and it is very acidic, and it's very good to balance the acidity in the blends of Franciacorta. So we can say that this is one key to solve the problem of the climate change. And the other, we can also produce with a lot of attention and a lot of care for our vineyards, not a big production, but trying to have the right balance of the production for per vine. And I think this could be the keys to solve this problem.
Great. Well, I think that's all for questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Constance.
Thank you.
Actually, you did mention Erba Mat, Lucia, and I'm always interested to ask what wineries are starting to work with it. I know that it was only recently approved. And I know that some wineries are more excited about it than others. So are you at Il Musnel, are you planting Erba Mat at this point? Do you have experimental plantings? Or
yes, we have experimented planting 1 hectare of Erba Mat. So we are at the beginning, and it's the 3rd year this year. Or, okay. Yes, the 3rd year. So we are experimenting, and just to understand how it is, this possibility we have with this. It's an old grape, and with a long work, we rediscover, we can say, this grape, but it's a grape coming from this area.
Understand. Great. And actually, Francesca, what about Castello Bonomi? Are you working with Erba Mat at all?
Yeah, we are working with Erba Mat, and we are already producing a cuvée, which is called, it's not the Franciacorta because it was vintage before the introduction of the Erba Mat in the consortium. So it's called Cuvée 1564 from the vintage where the Erba Mat was discovered. And so we produced for 4 years this cuvée, and then from vintage 2017, when the Erba Mat was introduced in the Franciacorta for a 10%, we will introduce it in our dosage zero.
Okay.
Yeah. So we will have that category. We choose that category because it's no sugar, and in this way you can feel a little bit more the Erba Mat also.
Great. And what about Cadebosco, Maurizio? Are you working with it at all, or?
Yes, we have Erba Mat in a still wine 30 years ago, but we have changed completely, like Lucia was telling to you, the clone of the Erba Mat, and we are studying currently with Milano University how to select the best clone of the Erba Mat, because we have a lot of sickness of viruses. And so we are cleaning the tree. So it's a work where some winery have the old material, but we want to go to a new material. So in my opinion, Erba Mat will be a very important project for the future. Today we have in all Franciacorta less than 7 hectares. So it's, let's say, ridiculous on 3,000 hectares. But all the producers, they need and they want to prove this fantastic varietal, because first, give the root to our appellation, but second, have the characteristic to be harvested 2 weeks after the Chardonnay, and third, give the freshness to the wine that probably we will need in 50 years with the global warming. So it's a fantastic project that they believe will be very successful, but for me, it's still a project. I see the development of these grapes personally that we can touch in the wine, in the Franciacorta in 10, 15 years, not earlier. I speak in a general. There are some wineries that produce now already, but I believe the project is working to grow in quality.
Great. Thank you so much. That's, yeah, I know this, I'm always interested to see what people are doing with that grape because it is still new. And I think one of the things we have to remind people is that you have to figure out how to grow that grape. You have to find virus-free clones. You have to identify which clones are best. And then you have to find out how to integrate it into your blend and the ageability. So it is a long-term project. Thank you so much. This concludes our conversation. I've enjoyed it very much. And to all our guests who've joined us, this does conclude our winemaker panel discussion series. So thank you so much for carving time out in your day to join us. If you missed some of them, you'd like to go back and revisit them, they are all on the Franciacorta Facebook page. If you didn't catch them live, you can still watch them at your convenience. A huge thank you to all the winemakers who left their days and faced traffic to come and sit and chat with us and help us understand all those beautiful wines. And I just want to say thank you to everybody and cheers, and please drink more Franciacorta. I know I will be having this glass as soon as I leave this meeting. So thank you again, everybody. Stay well, drink Franciacorta, have a healthy year. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, May. Bye.
Ciao.